Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of April. As usual, I am going to do this book battle style where I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. Also worth noting, a lot of these books I read as part of the Magical Readathon, and I did in fact manage to complete all my classes for the alchemy qualification. So I might try and put a note about which prompt each of these books met. But just know that I read 10 books for that readathon, and I'm very proud of myself. Although I think I've got 12 books to talk about in total. So let's start with the first battle. We have two Michael J. Sullivan books, The Heir of Novron versus Age of Myth. So both these books are in the same kind of bigger series. I think it's called The World of Elan. This one is the final book in the Ryria Revelations, where we're primarily following Royce and Hadrian, who are these two thieves, but one of their thieving jobs kind of goes a bit sideways and they end up getting involved in the politics and the magic of the world. And then by the time we get to this final book, we've also been introduced to a lot more characters in the world. To be honest, even though I do like Royce and Hadrian, and I think their character development through the series and like what they learn about themselves is really great, I actually tend to prefer some of the female characters. Like I really love the Princess Arista, and I also really love Medina. So I guess high level, we have these people in this world trying to create an empire, and perhaps they don't have the best of intentions. And then we have a bunch of heroes or characters that we've come to love that have kind of fallen into trying to save the day. In the second half of this, they go on a quest, which kind of leads to a final conclusion. And I did think maybe the pacing in the quest was a little bit slow for me. It did give the characters time to like build their relationships, but I kind of was always just hanging out for the big conclusion, and I did think the ending was very satisfying. The way that Michael J. Sullivan writes these books is that he writes the whole series before he publishes them. So this he actually wrote as 6 books, and then it was published as 3 books. And I was surprised because each of these books, it'll have like, this one had part 5 and part 6, and part 5 was quite short. Then part 6 I think maybe could have done with being a little bit shorter, or at least for my preference. But still, the way that he writes it means that he is able to kind of seed a lot of things through the series and then have everything come together in a really satisfying way in the end. And I also will say, like, throughout this, Michael J. Sullivan has a particular tone to his writing style where it's quite humorous. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's grimdark because I don't think it's quite grim enough, but it is like a little bit of a darker sense of humor at times. And I also think this is going to be quite readable because throughout this we learn a lot about like the history and the mythology of the world, because it does have some influence on the things that are happening in this book. And then the next book that I read is Age of Myth. So this is the first book in the, why can I never remember the series? Legends of the First Empire. So this is a 6-book series that is kind of telling you the history that we learn a little bit about in this book. And it becomes quite clear straight away that the history that they know in the future isn't exactly what really happened. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. In this one, basically what happens at the beginning is the humans think that these Frey, or the elves of the world, they think that they are like godlike beings that can't be killed. However, something happens right at the beginning which leads to one of these Frey being killed, which obviously some of the Frey are not very happy about, but it has also really changed the perspective of humans as they now realize the Frey aren't actually gods. And we've got a bunch of different characters that we meet in this. I think I loved all of them actually, except for the ones you're not supposed to. I especially loved Persephone, who is like this leader of this, I never know the right word to use. They like live in a town or a fort. What is the word that they used in the book? I've forgotten because I read this at the start of the month. Oh, and maybe it was a funny word. Wasn't there a glossary in this? Oh, a dal. Anyway, they live in this like fenced off village. Maybe village is the word I'm looking for. So one of the characters we have is this older woman in her 40s, and her husband has died. He was the like village leader, and now she's kind of having to take over a little bit. She's not supposed to be, but she can't help but try and solve people's problems because it's just what she's good at. She's also got this young girl with her who's been trained by the village mystic out in the forest. And she's come to town and said, there's some problems. We really need to go and talk to this tree about it. So this is Suri. Suri is so strange, but I love her. She has a really different perspective of the world just from being raised kind of away from everyone. And then we also have some characters who are Frey themselves. Like, not all the Frey are going to be bad guys, but certainly some of them are. And we learn a little bit about the world of the Frey as well. And it seems like they maybe have a bit of an interesting religion with a bit of a mystery to it as well. I don't know, there's a lot going on. I do feel like this book was mostly setting things up, like bringing our characters together, introducing us to people. It did have a very satisfying plot. Especially, I loved the riddle with the tree. I mean, just give me a riddle with a tree every day. I love it. So I like that. But really, even though I was very satisfied with this, it definitely just made me want to continue the series, which I will be, because I have this on my TBR for next month. So I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, if I am putting these two books up against each other, I actually think I would pick Age of Myth. Even though this one, I've had time to grow to love all the characters, I think maybe I like the characters in this one even more. And this one, as I said, I had some pacing problems with it. This one, I thought, it's fairly short, actually. And every single thing that happened, I felt like had meaning and had a place in the plot and moved things forward. And I can see how everything that happened in this book is going to be important, not just to the story that we read, but also to the future events. So I'm going to pick Age of Myth as the winner of this battle. Then, since it was a Michael J. Sullivan battle, let's now do an N.K. Jemisin battle. So we've got The Shadowed Sun up against The Kingdom of the Gods. Both of these ones are the last books in their respective series. So this one is the second and final book in the Dreamblood duology. If I'm honest, I didn't like this as much as the first book, and even the first book I was a little bit shaky on. But what I did really love about this series is the dream magic. So it's set in the city where they use narcomancy, and it's mostly used to heal people and things like that. And there's different ways that they gather it. One of them is these gatherers will go, and when people are either going to die soon or the priesthood judges people to be too corrupt, these gatherers will take these people into the land of dreams and then gather their dream blood as a consequence of that. And they kind of believe that if people aren't taken to this land of dreams, that then they will kind of not have a satisfying afterlife. But while the first book dealt with this corruption that was happening within the priesthood, and I thought dealt with some of the themes quite well, this one I didn't think the themes were quite as interesting. So in this book, it's set 10 years after the first book, and they've been taken over by this neighboring kingdom, and there's basically schemes in place trying to free them. And one of those schemes involves this healer who uses narcomancy to heal people, involves her being sent to these nomadic tribes that they're going to get to help them to win their freedom. So she's gone to stay with them, and they're very violent, and she almost gets raped, and it's all organized by this stupid, annoying guy that is supposed to be the love interest, and I hated him, and I did not think he was redeemable, and I didn't think anything he did actually redeemed him. And so then that whole romance plotline, hated it. As well, there were some other things going on in this that were actually more interesting, or would have been more interesting for me, but they just didn't get enough attention. So another thing that is going on in this is that people are starting to have these nightmares that will kill them, which shouldn't be happening when they have as much power as they do over dreams. And we learn quite early on what's actually going on with that, so you don't really get the mystery of figuring it out. But again, what's going on with that involves some quite awful violence toward women, which is very similar to what's happening to this healer in this other area where everyone's very violent towards women. And I was just really disappointed with how that was dealt with, or wasn't really dealt with very much in the plot. And I felt especially at the ending, it was trying to say something about female empowerment, but didn't. I don't know. I kind of also just thought this was quite predictable, and so I was kind of disappointed in it, which is actually a similar thing that I would say about this one. This is my copy that I got from a free little library, and it's got stickers all over the cover. This is not part of the actual cover design. just so you know. But so this is the third and final book in the inheritance cycle, which I know a lot of people rave about, and I don't really get it. Do you know, I do want to say, because I did have a couple of vlogs about these books, and people were like, oh, the best thing by N.K. Jemisin is the Broken Earth trilogy. I know. That's why I picked these up, because I love the Broken Earth trilogy. But these are a little bit more, especially the first book in this duology, not really fantasy romance, but the second one, too much fantasy romance for me. And then this one, also too much fantasy romance for me. The world that this series is set in is really cool, and I think I like the second book most in the trilogy. So basically in this world there were 3 initial gods, then one of the gods killed the second one and caused the third one to be like enslaved by humanity, and the first book really dealt with that slave god trying to free themselves and like schemes around that. This third book, we're following like a godling who's like a child of the gods, but not one of the 3 original gods. And honestly, I just don't like him as a character. He spends most of the book sulking about not being able to have what he wants while not really doing anything to ever try and change his situation. Even when he has like the power of a god, which he doesn't have through all of this. But even when he's like immensely powerful, he's not doing anything with that power. And maybe I'm thinking about the fact that there are some characters in here. This is hard to talk about without spoilers. There are characters in here who have so much power to change things, and I just don't feel like enough was done with that. I don't know. Maybe I was trying to say something with that, but I was just frustrated. I felt like our main character spent so much time just sulking about things and never doing anything about it. And I also felt like he was a massive hypocrite, because he was always judging these people for causing other people suffering, and then he would just like walk into a room and kill a bunch of people and not even think about it. And sure, you could say he's a god, so he has a different perspective of things, but also I didn't feel like his perspective felt very godlike. Like he didn't feel non-human. Most of the time, he just felt like a whiny guy. Cry, 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 nobody loves me. And the sad thing about this one, I think same as this actually, because this had those nightmares and that plot line could have been really cool. This one, we had near the end kind of this new mystery god introduced, and that part of the plot was cool, and I think so much more could have been done with that. And it did lead to the very ending of this book, I think, wrapping up the trilogy or wrapping up the series really well. But I just could have done without the majority of this book being blah 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 whiny guy. I don't know, maybe I just missed the point of this. But I will also say for both of these, something about N.K. Jemisin's writing I think sometimes is a bit confusing, so it took me quite a long time with both of these and the earlier books in the series. Maybe less true for this one, but definitely for this one. It took me quite a long time to even figure out what was really going on. Now, that probably is also true for the Broken Earth trilogy, but in the Broken Earth trilogy, it feels like you're supposed to be confused, and you're like figuring it out in a way that's like so exciting. Whereas in this, I just felt like I'm annoyed that I don't understand what's going on, because I feel like I'm supposed to know and I don't know. Anyway, if I am going to battle these 2 books up against each other, I kind of don't want to pick either of them. I think I gave them both 2.5 stars. Yeah, which for me basically means I thought they were okay, not great, but I can see why someone else would maybe like these, just not me. I guess if we look at it from the perspective of this one, I was more confused. This one, I actually knew what was going on. And I did feel like the ending of this was more satisfying. So I guess I'll pick this one. But I don't see it going much further in the book battle, to be honest. Okay, I've already been talking for way too long, so let's hope I can cut that down into maybe something more concise and maybe more coherent. Anyway, our next battle is going to be between A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Parry up against The Will of the Many by James Islington. Is it Islington or Islington? So, A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians is by H.G. Parry, who's a New Zealand author, and this I was really excited for. I had tried the first chapter, or a little bit more than that, I think, as part of my try a chapter project I was doing, and I loved it. We're basically following these young men who are really passionate about changing the law so that commoners will be allowed to use their magic, because in this world only nobles are allowed to use their magic. It's kind of set in the late 1700s, I think. Yes. And it turns out that it's actually like a retelling of the French Revolution and the events in France and London, and also I think Haiti around that time. So initially we've got these guys who turn out to be politicians, and one of them even turns out to be the Prime Minister. And in fact, most of the characters in this are actual historical figures, like real people, but just also a lot of them can do magic. And it's weird because the magic, while it influences everything that happens, it also doesn't change anything. As far as I can tell, it doesn't change anything from the like bigger historical actualities. So in a lot of ways, this is more of a historical fiction with magic. It just happens that the magic is there, but it's not really a fantasy because it's just the historical events. It just happens that there's magic. It's so weird to explain. I didn't really like that. I wanted the fantasy. Like, I love the characters. A lot of this is just these different politicians talking to each other and being so passionate about changing the world to be a better place. As I said, initially they're trying to make it so that commoners will be allowed to use their magic. Then they discover that magic is being used to enforce slavery or to support the slave trade. And they want to abolish the slave trade, which is what happened in real history. Just the motivations were slightly different. And of course, magic wasn't being used to enslave people. But we also get the perspective of this young slave girl who's been enslaved by magic, which basically means her whole, she can't move her body at all anymore by her own motivations. She's completely controlled by magic and just lives in her head. And some of the descriptions of that slavery was really awful, but well described. It felt very real, and I think gets across the message that slavery is awful, regardless of whether magic is involved. But also what I was going to say before is a lot of this is just these different politicians having these really passionate conversations with each other, but also being such good friends and so loyal to each other. A lot of this is just these guys really caring about each other, and it's so kind of endearing and heartwarming. So I kind of enjoyed this, but I also spent the whole time thinking, where's the epic fantasy plot that I was looking for? And even a lot of the action scenes or big things that would happen would be told at a distance, almost we were being told them in a historical way. So this was definitely an experience, and I am going to continue the duology in May, but I'm no longer expecting the duology to be a 5-star. In fact, I think I gave this 3 stars, but still, it was definitely interesting and different, very different. Then I read The Will of the Many. So this has been super hyped lately, and I thought I would jump on the hype train. It's the first book in what I think is going to be a trilogy, but I could be wrong. I guess maybe the author doesn't even know yet because it will depend on how things go. But basically in this world, magic is based around will. So each person has a certain amount of will, and you can give that over to your superior. Also, there's a hierarchy, and there's a bunch of complicated maths about how much will you as an individual will have based on the pyramid of people who are giving their will to you. But our main character is basically this exile in hiding, and he doesn't want to ever have to give his will over to someone else. He finds that whole concept disgusting, which is definitely interesting when you think about that compared to some of what goes on in our actual everyday society. But anyway, he runs into these people that basically want to send him to this military academy, and they want him to go there so that he will spy for them. And there's actually another group that also wants him to go there to spy for them. He only wants to go so that he can then get himself into a position where he will never have to cede his will to someone else. Because even though he does have reasons why perhaps he might want to change the way that society works, he also doesn't really see that as possible. So really he's just trying to find a place for himself to go and hide. But hiding gets harder and harder, I guess, as he goes through this book, or there's definitely some challenges. So I will say the beginning of this, I was really bored. There's a lot of preparing and training and just setting up for him to go to this school, and all of that felt very drawn out. There was a lot of like political conversations, but because I didn't have the context, I was just bored for all of that setup. And it was really reminding me of everything I didn't like about Red Rising, which is also quite a similar setup. So at that point, I was feeling pretty doubtful about whether I would like this. However, once he gets to the school, then I would compare it a little bit more to like Name of the Wind. I really liked some of the relationships he was forming with his school friends. I will say there were definitely times where it was a little bit unbelievable how he was so much better at everything than everyone else. But even though I didn't like the main character, I did really like his friends. So like I wanted him to succeed. And then we also start learning some kind of like dark, creepy secrets about the world, which I'm really interested to continue the series to learn more about that. And also like right at the end, we learned something like the very, very last chapter is 100% set up for the next book. And after reading that, I'm so excited for the next book in the series because I think it's going to be weird and creepy and cool. And that's what I want from this. So hopefully, because yeah, as I said, the first half of this, probably I was bored. The second half I was on board. But I'm kind of hopeful that the next book is going to be like a step up, like a level up on what this was. Because I think from here, the series has a lot of potential. But this was just like setting up that potential. And now I guess we'll see what the rest of the series does. So if I'm putting these two books up against each other, I'm going to have to pick The Will of the Many because it was just a lot better written. And like, even though the beginning of this felt like a bit of a slog to me, like a lot of this felt very sloggy to me. Even though this was probably more unique, maybe. But this was definitely more enjoyable. Then for the next battle, we have Translation State by Leckie up against The Wrong Woman by J.P. Pomare. So, Translation State, I just tried to describe this and completely failed. At a high level though, we're following three characters who are to some degree on the cusp of adulthood, or at least emotionally, and they are trying to find where they belong and what they want to do. That's vague enough, right? But this is in a world where humans have like spread out across the universe and we've encountered these different aliens. Most of these aliens are fine. They're a little bit different from humans, but we can interact with them. That there's this one particular kind of aliens that when we encountered them, basically would just like destroy the ships, open people up. It was disgusting. But somehow a treaty has been made with them. And there are these alien translators who are part alien, part human that are used to like translate. So one of the characters in this is one of these alien translators. And I love their perspective. It's so non-human and like they're being taught about how to be human and how to interact with humans. But everything they know about humans is like surface level, small talk type stuff. Or even they're not good at small talk because there's one bit where this translator is like, oh, the small talk topic I talk about at the moment is shapes. That's a very human concept. So my teachers are very proud of me for talking about shapes. And it's so weird and I love it, even though it kind of like taken out of context doesn't make any sense. And that's what I love. I love books that can like set things in place so that then when it talks about things that don't make any sense, because of the context it's set up, it does make sense. I love it. And I also just love those like non-human perspectives. But this book is also like a bit all over the place. We also have just like a lot of administration and like working through different processes. So it kind of goes from like really calm and methodical to escalating into something really bizarre and weird and then doing both of those things at the same time. I do think there were parts of this where I thought the very simple language that was being used and just the way the characters were being very calm about things for certain reasons, I felt like it took away a little bit from the emotional content of the story. I think this could have been like gut-wrenching, but it didn't quite pull that off. Instead, it was just more like intellectually interesting, but still, I loved it. Like, I think this could have been mind-blowing. Probably the first book in the original Imperial Raj trilogy. I'm pointing because it's behind me. The first book was definitely still the best. I don't think anything in the bigger series has topped that, but none of it's really tried to. It's it's almost like a completely different tone in some ways, but still a lot of the same ideas. So I love the way that Leckie is playing with these like non-human perspectives, and I also really enjoy the way they're playing with non-binary genders in this. Like, I just love the idea of this book. I had a great time. Even though I think it could have been more, but also it was still so amazing anyway. Then The Wrong Woman by J.P. Pomare. So if this is the kind of book that I know I love, like a book that plays with concepts and reality, this kind of book is not something I normally like. So this is kind of just your typical domestic thriller. And I don't pick up a lot of thrillers these days because I haven't really been able to find the kinds of ones that I like. However, J.P. Pomare is a New Zealand author and I have really loved some of his stuff. So I picked this one out. And unfortunately, it was a little bit too domestic for me. Primarily, we're following this woman who met her husband when he was a professor and also married to someone else. And then now she's worrying, is he having an affair with a younger woman? And he's clearly a shitty person. And that whole kind of like toxic relationship, shitty guy stuff, not something I enjoy reading because honestly, there's enough of that in the real world. And I don't feel like it necessarily like added anything particularly special to the topic. But I mean, as a thriller, like if you like reading about that kind of thing, which I don't, but if you do, I do think this was still a well-written thriller. J.P. Pomare is still always really good at like setting all the pieces in place and then having them come together in unexpected ways at the end. Like, I think this was really well written. I just think the topic that it was based around wasn't something that's my preference. Hey, I actually talked about this one quickly. So if I'm battling these books up against each other, I think it's quite obvious. I'm going to pick Translation State. Okay, then the rest of the books on my list are pretty short, so hopefully I can talk about them in a short way. So our next battle is going to be The River Has Roots by Amal Mohtar up against Cursed Princess Club Volume 2 by Lambcat. So firstly, The River Has Roots. I was going to immersion read this, but I didn't actually manage to. In the end, I just read this physically. The book is particularly lovely. It's full of a bunch of like images. They're nothing too amazing, but I think they fit the vibe of the story really well. And the vibes of the story is really what this is all about, because this is really short. Like once you take into account the fact that you've got all those pictures and then you've got occasional like, well, that's not a good example, but occasional blank pages. And actually at the end of the book, there's like another separate short story that's like a whole different thing. And once you take that into account, this is actually like an incredibly short story. And it really is mostly just like a fairy tale. So we're following these two sisters that live next to this river that comes out of the land of the Fae, or whatever it's called in this. And there's a lot of beautiful writing describing what this river is like and the willow trees that hang over it that these two sisters go and sing to every morning and every night. And we're primarily following these two sisters and just learning about their relationship. And then I guess when one of the sisters ends up traveling into the land of the Fae, kind of what they're willing to go through in order to take care of and protect their sister. So as I said, the writing is beautiful. It's very whimsical and lovely and fairy tale feeling. But the actual story itself is pretty simple. Like when I say it's a fairy tale, it feels like a fairy tale story. There's not that much more kind of expansion to it. So I love this, but I think you also have to have the right expectations for it. And to be honest, so the best thing I loved about this is just the line, demand more. But whenever I think about that in relation to the story, there's a chicken. That's not related to what I'm saying. But whenever I think of demand more in relation to the story, I feel like, should I demand more of the story? Like, I think it was really good, actually. And I think if anything more had been added to it and expanded upon, that it actually would have ruined the vibes. So while actually with this one, I was like, I think it could have been more. Like, I loved it, but I think it could have been more. This one, I loved it, and I don't actually think it should have been more, but I wouldn't be against like something else that used some of the ideas from this. That could be cool. But this also was just really beautiful and lovely. Okay, then The Cursed Princess Club Volume 2. This was a reread for me. I absolutely love this series. We are basically following the Pastel Princesses, which is these three. This is their brother. They are betrothed to the three Plaid Princes, but when the youngest prince meets Gwendolyn and sees she has green hair and green skin, he's like, well, she's ugly, which kind of leads to her running out into the forest and meeting up with the Cursed Princess Club, which is this whole club of princesses with different curses. And honestly, I love all of the Cursed Princess Club. This volume mainly focuses around a party. I especially love the older sisters, Maria and Lorena. In this, they come up against these other women who have crushes on their princes, and the way that Maria and Lorena react to this like girl hate is just so great. Like they don't buy into it at all, and I loved it. Like this series has a lot of women supporting women, and I love it. And also men supporting women, even though that kind of the inciting incident is Frederick being a dick. You see him as well struggle a lot with his self-esteem. Here he is. Anyway, I've read this before. I knew I was going to love rereading it, and I did. So that's not a surprise. If I am battling these against each other, to be honest, I would pick Cursed Princess Club. However, I don't let rereads win the battle, so instead I'm going to put The River Has Roots through to the semi-finals. I think it will work out. And then finally, I have a graphic battle. So we have Enigma by Graeme Base up against Witch Hat Atelier Volume 6 by Kamome Shirahama. So firstly, Enigma by Graeme Base. I have read things by Graeme Base. Wait, here. The 11th Hour by Graeme Base. I love it. Also his other book, Animalia, which is more just about looking at pictures and finding things. I really love that as well. This is a similar kind of thing. This one as well is mostly about looking at the pictures and finding secret things hidden in the pictures. We're following this young boy. His grandfather is a magician. He turns up at the retirement home and someone has stolen all the magical items from the different animals who live at this retirement home. And so then you kind of have to search and try and find them. There is also at the back of this book this like special code breaker thing. And if you can figure out the symbols to turn these dials to, then you can pull this down. I did work it out. I was very proud of myself because I bought this a while ago when I was working a very stressful job, and at the time I did not have the brain power to solve it. But actually, when I looked at it with a clear mind, it wasn't that hard. I will say there is kind of a whole thing in here about figuring out these anagrams. I wasn't in the mood. I'm too lazy. I could have done it. I know I could have done it, and so that's why I didn't bother. But I did enjoy looking at the pictures and finding all the secrets. I know these books are just children's books, but still, I was proud of myself for finding everything you're supposed to find and figuring out everything you're supposed to figure out. Then we have Witch Hat Atelier Volume 6. To be honest, I DNF'd this in the end, and I am finally going to DNF this series. I've just realized it's not to my taste. It's mostly about these cute little girls learning magic in this world where magic is like drawing based, and there's like this secret organization of witches causing trouble. And I always think these books are almost to the point of getting interesting, and then nothing happens. It's a lot of these really cute little girls learning different life lessons, and I don't care. Like, probably it's really cute, but I just can't bring myself to care. This volume 6, they went back to the capital, and it seemed like it was going to be this really cool like underwater city, and the art was beautiful, but I just don't care. So I read to 20% of the way in, and then I took a bit of a break because I just didn't care. And when I came back to it, I thought, yeah, I just don't care. I don't care about anything that's happening. So I've decided it's just not for me. Like, I can see why some people would like this. I'm sure some people would relate to these experiences these girls are having, and some people won't mind the real slow pace. But to be honest, I don't know at this point whether there's been any manga series that I've actually loved beyond the first few volumes. So now I don't even know whether I should try any more manga or just not even bother. I don't know. But anyway, I've DNF'd Witch Hat. So that means if I'm battling these up against each other, I'm going to pick Enigma, even though it's a kid's book. So now to decide the best book of the month, let's do a semi-final round. So firstly, we've got Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan up against The Kingdom of the Gods by N.K. Jemisin. I think it's obvious, right? I'm not going to pick this one. It annoyed me. So I'm going to pick Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan. Very well written, very satisfying. I had a great time. Then we have The Will of the Many by James Islington up against Translation State by Leckie. Whew. I feel like I would recommend this one to a lot more people. However, for my personal taste, Translation State was perfect. Like it wasn't perfect, you know? Like I think so much more could have been done with this. And I have lots of critiques of this, but also I just love the way it had me thinking the whole time, and I love the different perspectives, and I love how like reality altering it was. So even though I think maybe a lot of people would like this better, and I did like this, I'm going to pick Translation State. And then lastly, we have The River Has Roots by Amal Mohtar up against Enigma by Graeme. And for these, I can't pick Enigma. It was just too basic, too nothing, really. So I'm going to pick The River Has Roots because it is a really beautiful story. And I think if you go in just wanting something little and small and lovely with a great little story about some sisters, I think you could love this. So then we have the final book battle to decide the best book of the month. We have Age of Myth by Michael J. Sullivan up against Translation State by Leckie, up against The River Has Roots by Amal Mohtar. So I think of these three books, firstly, I am going to take away The River Has Roots just because it was beautiful and really lovely. Like I keep saying the same words over and over again. I just wish, no, I don't actually want this to be anything different than what it was. I think this was lovely. I don't know how to cut this out of the battle without saying a but. I think this was lovely, and that's it. Just lovely. Whereas these books were more than just lovely. I don't know how to decide the best of these. I feel like when I talk about Translation State, I feel more passionate about it. I feel like that feeling of excitement of like new ideas and something cool. But I have more critiques of this than I do Age of Myth. I feel like Age of Myth was such a solid fantasy story, like such a good setup for a series. I loved all the characters so much. I loved how every piece of the plot was important. Like, I love the reading experience. I love the reading experience of this too, but just it was a completely different kind of experience. This was like a tried and true fantasy experience. And this was something weird and different. I mean, this was more unique, but this I would recommend to more people. I rated both of these 4.5 stars, so that's not helpful to decide. Do you know what? I'm going to pick Age of Myth because of the tree. The tree riddle. That gave me that little bit of like feeling of joy that I feel like this gave me. Like that little bit of weirdness. Oh, and just everything Suri says in this book actually gave me that feeling of weirdness that I love. And there definitely are some parts in this where you get that like non-human perspective. Like you have these elves that are living 3,000 years, so they have a different perspective of things. And there's a couple of other characters that I'm a bit sus about. So maybe I picked this for the promise that it makes me feel for the rest of the series. Okay, so this will be, goodness, so shiny. This will be the best book of the month. And I really am looking forward to continuing this series. So let me know if you've read any of these books because I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments. Or let me know what was the best book that you read in the month of April. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.